We spoke before the break about the importance of ensuring that the transition to sustainable economies leaves no one behind. And we acknowledged that it is going to take a fundamental shift in development models to get there. The bottom line is, and we know it, we must decouple growth and resource use. That is absolutely imperative. In this session, we want to delve deeper into how we do that. Our topic is inclusive growth and full employment, creating opportunity in a disruptive environment. And we begin with a keynote by a renowned leader in the global fight against poverty. Professor Jeffrey Sachs is director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, where he teaches sustainable development and health policy and management. As special advisor to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, he played a key role in the process of arriving at the Sustainable Development Goals. He is also director of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. It is a very great honor to have with us Professor Jeffrey Sachs. The floor is yours.
Good morning, friends. Let me just mention it's Secretary General Antonio Guterres, of course, now. And it's a great pleasure to be among many leaders in the fight for sustainable development. This is a very unusual battle that we're in. We're not winning. We haven't lost. But definitely there's not a moment for complacency. The big problem that we have with this particular subject, unlike many, many other subjects, is that sustainable development isn't about doing the right thing as soon as we can. It's about avoiding irreversible disasters, meaning that delay isn't merely postponement. Delay may mean losing the chance for safety. And there are at least 3 areas for our agenda where we face potential dire irreversibilities. Of course, climate is one of them. The climate scientists have emphasized with increasing urgency that there is a potential powerful nonlinearity in the neighborhood of the temperatures that we're now reaching. We don't know whether it's really 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial or 2 degrees C above pre-industrial. But what we do know is that we are about to leave the climate zone of the Holocene period. We're about to exceed temperatures that Earth has experienced during the last 10,000 years. We know one frightening fact, that the last time that Earth was 2 degrees C warmer than pre-industrial, which was the Eemian period in the previous interglacial, the sea level was 6 meters higher than now. So one kind of nonlinearity is that they may sink my little island economy, Manhattan. And yours too, because most of the world's cities are on the coasts. And we're just flirting with that kind of irreversibility and the disappearance of habitable land that now is home to hundreds of millions of people. We don't even know when. Maybe that's a century off. But that's the kind of irreversible disaster that we're flirting with. The second is the collapse of biodiversity, what the ecologists have called the 6th great extinction. This is also underway now. We know for major classes of organisms, both plants and animals, that we're seeing catastrophic declines. that will be irreversible. Look at the news out of Australia last week that 80% of the Great Barrier Reef died in the warm waters of the last 3 years. 80%. And we know from our leading biologists that there are cataclysmic changes underway in many biomes of this planet. These are irreversible. Again, we don't know quite how close, but we know that it's underway right now. Let me mention a third kind of problem. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. And that is, we are 7.5 billion people on the planet. Depending on decisions that are taken in the next few years, and assuming we don't destroy ourselves in ways that we know how to do, we will be somewhere between perhaps 9 billion at the lower end and 11 billion people at the higher end by the end of this century. 11 billion people on the planet, with most of the increase in Africa, would be devastating for Africa's development hopes. For Africa to have a continued demographic explosion, as is underway right now, with the population quadrupling in the 21st century, which is what the medium fertility forecast of the United Nations has, would make it impossible for Africa to escape from poverty. It would make it impossible for Europe to address its migration issues. It would make it impossible to maintain environmental sustainability in Africa, because Africa is, of course, one of the most vulnerable parts of the whole world system to the climate change and biodiversity loss that's underway. But those choices will depend on whether there is adequate education for today's young people in poor countries. And that's a choice that we have to make now. So it's another kind of irreversibility. So all of this topic of sustainable development should just make us nervous every day. I'm a nervous wreck. Because this is not like normal politics. And all the happy stories, I'll match you with 10 unhappy stories. Because there's nothing automatic about success. In fact, we're not on a sustainable trajectory right now. We are not on a Paris-consistent trajectory right now. We are not on an SDG consistent trajectory right now. So that's my first point. It's not just delay, it will be disaster if we continue the way we're going. The second point is what to do. And there are two parts to it: plans and politics. The transformation we need is complex. It is not simple. The market cannot figure this out. This cannot be the result of decentralized decisions. Take this country, which is completely dedicated to an energy transition. Look at how hard it is, because so many public decisions are required all the time. Where are the power lines going to be? Will there be power lines? What technologies are permissible? Which ones are not permissible? Even this country, which is one of the best organized and governed in the world, is showing how, and with the top engineers, is showing how hard it is. Most countries do not have plans. Most of what are called plans are kind of undergraduate essays. That is meant to be pejorative, actually, because then they go on, we train them. But this is not adequate. You cannot make an energy transition without a detailed planning strategy. And it's not a project at a time. It's a conceptual framework. It is understanding the depth of the transition needed and understanding the technological options that apply in each place and understanding the kinds of transnational cooperation that's needed, something that has eluded Europe as well. There is no European-wide energy plan to this day. There's just energy nationalism. Even discussing how to get renewable energy from the southern Europe to northern Europe was put off the agenda. So this is really a major problem. I'm advising New York City on this right now as a co-chair of a city advisory panel. It's quite fascinating for me because New York's a pretty sophisticated place. Of course, they've never looked at deep decarbonization before. Why would you? It was never a topic. The utility never, the public utility never looked at this issue before. There are no plans on the table beyond the year 2030. The Public Service Commission, everything about planning for energy was just about meeting peak load. It had nothing to do with carbon. And so this is a first time through. So if your country is not deeply engaged in planning, you're not even in the game yet. What are the plans? What are the real scenarios? What do the engineers tell you? But interestingly, there isn't so much space for serious plans in the sense that we pretty much know now what are the scalable technologies that could be in place for 2040 and 2050. Of course, there will be magnificent breakthroughs between now and then, but they won't be the scaled in situ technologies that will deliver deep decarbonization by then. So we already know a lot about the renewable energy opportunities, nuclear power opportunities. We already know a lot about electric vehicles, but what we don't have is scaled plans with the timing required, except in a few countries. As always, the Scandinavian countries are there with plans, and they'll make it. We should learn from Copenhagen reaching net zero in 2026, according to their plan, or how Stockholm is going to do it, or how Oslo is going to do it, because they're the world leaders in this. So we should watch what they're doing, learn from it, make comparable plans, move quickly. It's not impossible. It's basically zero carbon electricity and electrification of everything. If you need to summarize in one sentence, that's probably the best summary of what's needed. But there are a lot of footnotes to that that can fill several volumes of technical specifications. But the second part is politics. I know, I'm coming from the United States. We are so corrupt, you cannot even believe it. Okay? If you want to understand what's happening in the United States, think money morning till night. Why is the Republican Party, every single one of them, a climate denier? Because they're all idiots? No. That looks like an attractive hypothesis, but it's not. It's because they're all corrupted by big money. And the money comes from the Koch brothers, it comes from ExxonMobil, it comes from Chevron, comes from the US Chamber of Commerce, which is a front organization for big oil in the United States. Who is our new head of the Environmental Protection Agency, this Mr. Scott Nobody Pruitt? who you couldn't even care what he thinks. He's an idiot, sorry. But why is he there? Because he's been funded by the oil industry for the last 15 years. This is real politics, ladies and gentlemen. We're up against the most powerful lobby in the world. They're not just going away. They like their billions. They like being rich. I don't know what they think about their children and their grandchildren. It's something we have to ask them on every occasion. But this is about money. And all your solar and wind and everything else, by the way, it's not going to outcompete fossil fuel in the end. We're going to have to choose, because the fossil fuel lifting prices are low enough to completely wreck the planet. And we don't have the politics sewn up by any means right now. This is a brawl. Don't be polite. This is a fight for the future. It's not just going to happen. And we're facing really tough opponents. They gave the State Department to ExxonMobil, for God's sake. They gave the Environmental Protection Agency to the oil industry. They gave the Department of Energy to the Department of Texas. Why? Because it's real money. And you look at all the nice places around the world. We have this Keystone Pipeline still on the agenda because Obama's brought it back to life. Who could stop it in one moment? Justin Trudeau. It's a Canadian pipeline. Why doesn't he stop it? No way he's going to stop it. Because of the oil money in Canada. Look at Norway, my beloved Norway, happiest country in the world. Top of every list on everything. It's a fabulous country. It's still drilling in the Arctic. Why? I can show you how much oil and gas has to be stranded of what we already have. There's no case for more drilling. Look at Australia. Their game is to ignore everything, and then they lose 80% of the Great Barrier Reef in 3 years. How smart is that? How clever is that? So remember, there are only around 10 countries with the fossil fuel reserves to wreck the planet. The US, India, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Canada. And the politics in all of them is brutal because there are a lot of rich, powerful people, because they're all petrostates, because they're all determined to show us how pathetic we are. All our nice meetings, but we don't win, to use Donald Trump's phrase. Don't argue with them about facts, by the way. It has nothing to do with science, facts, anything. It's just money. It's gross. But that's what the politics are. And it's tough, and we had better be together on this. And that's my third point. We desperately need to be international at every moment. We have to hang together and help each other constantly. This has to be a global political movement, not just global UN goals. This has to be politics, international politics, national politicians helping other national politicians to face down the money and the power and the vested interests. So there are three parts of that international solidarity that I want to mention. First is politics. We need really a global green politics. And whether it's the Green Party or whether it's any party that subscribes to this, we absolutely need to have this as an electoral and street movement, because otherwise we will not win. Second is we need global solidarity on planning and on science and engineering. And the scientific community still needs to get organized better to be practically helpful in this. The engineering community needs to be better organized so that we can have the engineering expertise available anywhere at any time to make the serious longer-term plans. We don't have to reinvent the same strategies 196 times for each of the signatories of the Paris Agreement. And we need expertise, by the way, in another area, I mean, on the biodiversity as well, which is even harder. It's a much more complex agenda, actually. With energy, you can summarize in a limited way the core components of change. But for sustainable agriculture, sustainable land use, that is an incredibly difficult, complex, scientific challenge, almost completely unsolved right now. We know that we're losing the biodiversity, but we don't know how and where to save it and how to make it compatible with our food and other land use needs. And so that's another area where the scientific cooperation is essential. For Ban Ki-moon 5 years ago, my colleagues and I started a Global Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We have a very dynamic chapter of SDSN in Germany. Dirk Messner is here, who has been organizing and leading this. It's a phenomenal effort. And we aim, and I want to encourage for all of you, wherever you're coming from, go home to your universities. Get them to be partners with you. Governments, almost nowhere do governments have the capacity to do this work in-house. These are highly technical issues. You know, by the way, in our 535 members of Congress, we have 2 PhD scientists out of 535. 2 out of 535. I look to them for nothing except pray that they leave this world alone. We're not going to get the expertise inside government, and this is too technical for the politicians. We need leading scientific experts. We need businesses of goodwill, and especially businesses on the right side of the divide. And incidentally, there are a few oil companies that are crossing from the dark side to the good side. And I would say Statoil, as I mentioned earlier, though it's drilling in the Arctic, is definitely one of them. It's going to be probably the world's leader in offshore wind power soon, because it knows from its expertise in offshore drilling how to do offshore wind. It's going to be a great market for Norway as well. So there is a safe home, but if you're in the fossil fuel business, you got to go out of business. It's simple. And we got to make sure you go out of business. And my job in part is to do whatever I can to bankrupt the coal industry as fast as possible. And it's not about jobs because, as you heard from Eric Solheim, there are about 70,000 people out of 150 million in the coal sector in the United States, and only about 20,000 miners. This has nothing to do with jobs. This has only to do with greed. And it's not about the workers. there's a lot better jobs than coal mining. Safer, healthier. And finally, we need governments to take seriously the agenda that they have adopted, including the financing. So politics is for us on the streets. The expertise and the planning is really for the experts, especially in university and national laboratories and leading businesses around the world. But governments do have a role. They manage the public budget. That's their main job. And we need international solidarity, and we don't have it right now. As you know, my idiot president says that he wants to raise national defense $54 billion and do it by cutting development aid. Okay, what adjective would you use? I know I'm being impolite, but I have to live with him every day. An ignoramus, I'm sorry. So this is not international solidarity, but everywhere I go in the international system, except in China, there's no money. There's no money for anything. And so this is going to be the death of what we're trying to do as well. Because the basic idea of economics, the only thing that an economist could add here, is the idea that if you want something, you better invest in it. That is the only truth in economics, that none of this is free. All of it has a reason. All of it has a social return. Much of it does not have a private return. That's the other basic wisdom of good economics, that markets will never do this for lots of reasons. But society should do it because we like to survive. We like a nice world for our children and our grandchildren, which is our biggest calling on this planet, is to make sure that we're doing something decent for our children. And so we have good reason to do it. And you know what? It's inexpensive. The whole Sustainable Development Agenda is 2 or 3% of world output. It's nothing. It is the bargain of the world. That's the irony. But it's not free. And so I really call on the governments to back this up with the resources that are needed. That's the government's job. Ladies and gentlemen, time is very short. We're not winning, but we can. And it's going to be worth fighting for every day. And let's hurry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for those very clear words. Jeffrey Sachs told us if we want something, we better invest, and we need a global political movement to get where we want to go, where we need to go. And we have now with us an international panel that essentially reflects both of those. All are committing enormous personal as well as other resources to try to bring about the kind of transformation that we're talking about. So let me ask our international panel to now please join me here on the stage. So Ms. Byer-Suckoo, if you'll come here, please. Mr. Heraeus, here, please. And then I'll ask the other two. That's perfect. Thank you. Right there. And Mr. Sukhdev there. Thank you very much. So with an eye on the clock, I am going to cut the introductions essentially to name and title. I hope you all will consult your programs, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to know more about our very eminent speakers. And I'm also going to ask for short answers to the questions so that we can perhaps get in a couple of rounds. So I begin with here on my left, your right, ladies and gentlemen, is Esther Byer-Suckoo. She is Minister of Labor from the Page partner country Barbados, and she has also had the environmental portfolio in her country. A very warm welcome to you. Seated next to her is Pavan Sukhdev. He is UN Environment's Goodwill Ambassador, as well as Special Advisor and Head of its Green Economy Initiative. And he's also founder of the Indian NGO GIST, which stands for the Green Indian States Trust. Great to have you with us as well. On my right is Jürgen Heraeus. He is chairman of the Supervisory Board of the family-owned technology and metals company Heraeus Holding. He also chairs the B20, which is the network that brings together the G20 business community during Germany's G20 presidency. Great that you can join us. And it's my pleasure to introduce Vic van Vuuren. He is Director of Enterprise Department of the Enterprise Department at the International Labor Organization, which of course is also a Page partner. Great to have you as well. Thank you. So I'd like to try to do one quick round of questions and answers about content, as it were, and then a second one very briefly on process, if we make it time-wise. And on the content side, I'd like to ask you to share your views on the concrete policy goals and approaches that you see as working right now to transform our economies in that direction of inclusive green growth. So what transformative action is your organization or your sector involved in? And I'll begin with the policy maker on the panel, because Jeffrey Sachs, like the panel before the break, emphasized how important it is to get that clear and coherent policy framework in place. Now, you face, as an island nation with a pretty fragile environment, limited natural resources, and very densely populated, big challenges in trying to address those two twin goals, inclusive and green. So tell us what you're doing.
Well, that is exactly the crux of the problem for us in Barbados. Small island developing state, we're already seeing the effects of global warming. We're already seeing our reefs being damaged. We're seeing our fisheries being affected because of the reef damage. We're seeing our coastal infrastructure being damaged. So for us, our sustainable development is not about a plan, an undergraduate essay, if you will. For us, sustainable development is in action. It is something that for the last 2 or 3 decades we've taken on board, and we've had to implement, and seriously. One of the things that has been working for us is that successive leaders in political parties, we've changed political parties a couple of times in the last 2 decades, but successive leaders have championed a sustainable development agenda, and I think that is important. You must have political leadership for it to work. Additionally, climate change and its adaptation and mitigation, and now we've moved towards the green economy as well, those are seen as cross-cutting issues. They're not Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Environment, or Ministry of Energy. They're actually cross-cutting. They're on everybody's program, on everybody's agenda. And so that is, as we're doing now with the Sustainable Development Goals as well. But that, to me, is one of the things that has helped as well, because it has helped to sensitize, and it has helped to bring that action and to propel that action forward, because it is not just sitting in one particular ministry. It's everybody's responsibility. And we have a strong social partnership, a tripartite social partnership, and they have also taken the lead as well. It is articulated in the protocol of the social partnership, the aim of sustainable development. And again, I think for us that is key, because it means that we have been able to engage stakeholders. We've been able to engage business. We've been able to engage our trade unions, civil society, or faith-based organizations. In Barbados, if you want anything done, you convince the church and they convince the masses. We're still a very religious society. So we have our faith-based organizations on board. So that has been able to help us to get to where to where we are now, not to where we need to be. There's still so much left to be done. Every day we see new risks, new hazards, across the region. We see severe climatic events just literally decimating the development in the countries. 2 days of rain and St. Vincent is washed out. 1 day of rain and Dominica loses all of its infrastructure, that kind of thing. So we have had to step up our game, literally, and to bring all our partners on board. One of the transformative actions, too, is that we have implemented a human resource development strategy. We've done this with the help of the EU, 50 million euros, human resource development, identifying where the gaps are, identifying where the emphasis needs to be in terms of training our people, because as we transform our economy, as we look to sustainable development, it means that jobs have to change, processes have to change, people have to change how they work. Some people may not adapt, and so we've had to ensure that we have a social security network that can absorb those folks as well. But training for our young people and training for entrepreneurship, putting finances aside for entrepreneurship in terms of adaptation, mitigation, sustainable development.
Thank you very much. Let me now go over to the private sector and ask you, Jürgen Heraeus, to speak wearing both of your hats, as it were. So both the chairman of the B20, but also your hat as someone coming from the metals industry. As we heard from Minister Hendricks earlier, Germany has put natural resource use on the G20 agenda, plans to make it a crucial topic at the summit. What does that mean for the network of the B20 as a whole, and also for you as I say, as a metals and technology company? We heard Jeffrey Sachs talking about the vested interests that essentially are having a tough time letting go of the old economy. Would you say that is true here as well?
Well, after this morning, I'm much more confused, but on a much higher, greener level. You heard Jeffrey Sachs, how difficult it is in Germany to make the energy transition. And if you ask why, this is our democratic system. And before, I heard from Winnie and from others that we have 4,000 civil societies in the world who all want to participate. And she claimed, shift power to ordinary people. Okay, we partly did this in Germany. For instance, to build the railway station in Stuttgart, U21. We shifted the power to the people, and it was a disaster. We have 17 länder in Germany where the wind power energy from the north should go to the south where it is needed. Every country, every of the states, every people, all this, they all want to claim, they all participate, and it will take years and years. On the other side, we have China. They make a railway, and it goes, and if there are houses and people there, away. So they are so successful. So, which is not a good thing either. So, is our democratic system, as we heard from Jeffrey, is it on the end? And if this is so, what happens? If we give the power to the people, there will be not possible to make plans as they have to be. And this, I think, is a real dilemma. And if we shift, and if I go to our company, we have now lifted the money for R&D to 140, 150 million euros a year, which is about half of the profit, because the changes are going so fast that we have difficulties to follow. Our employees in Germany, 96% of the employees have a abgeschlossene Berufsausbildung.
Have completed vocational training.
Vocational training. So with them, I think we can make the future. But the others who are left, those who should be inclusive, it's very, very difficult in Germany. And if I just take what Jeffrey said, that coal industry is out and everybody finds a new job in the green industry, yes, in the long run, But in the short run, and I think Vic from ILO can put his part then. For instance, in China, there is overcapacity in steel. Steel industry, the old one, is the worst part for CO2 in the air and all this. And the government says, yes, we have to close. We have to close the overcapacity, but this means that 1.2 million people will lose their job. And until they can find a job in the green industry, this will be not in a month, this will not be in a year, and this will not be in 2 or 3 years. It will be in the long run, but it doesn't help the people. I think this is a dilemma.
Just a brief word, if you would, on what the B20 is going to do in this area. What are your priorities, given all that you've just said to us?
The priority this year, I think, is digital, which was brought up by the Chinese, which has the highest participation. The other is climate, which is not new, which is on the agenda every year. I think Germany puts there what is new. I think especially in the carbon certificates and all this will be promoted. But to get get consent in these 20 governments, now America is, US is the most difficult suddenly. Chinese are easier. Things change. So this is, I think, what German government brings in. And you know that Mrs. Merkel, before she was chancellor, she had the position of Minister Hendricks. So, and she's a physicist. So she really knows things, and she pushed this forward very good.
Thank you very much. Let me then indeed go on to Vic van Vuuren and the ILO. I'm glad Jürgen Heraeus brought up digital, because digitalization, of course, is also part of that shift to greener economies, but many people feel digitalization is also part of the problem when it comes to the possible destruction of jobs. So what, in your view, are the key transformative actions that we have to take right now in order to make sure that this enormous shift in the structure of our economies is as inclusive as we can make it?
Thank you. I think I just want to start at the macro level, where a lot has been said about the way we approach this race to deal with the challenges of the climate change. I think first of all, when we started this race, I was taught to use a PC and I was taught to spell. And in the race, I didn't realize that PC doesn't mean a personal computer. It comes back to the point raised in the previous speaker, power and corruption. And then the whole race of spelling is not profit spelled P-R-O-F-I-T, it's spelled G-R-E-E-D. And that's a continual challenge we have. And so the value proposition that we faced with needs to be re-examined. And what I find interesting from yesterday's media briefing and today, we're touching on the whole value proposition. And for us in the ILO, the value proposition is becoming important in the world of work. We need to reinstitute the value of the human being and the value of the planet. And the closest thing that we're finding that is the debate around social enterprises and the whole social and solidarity economy. And I don't think that has been explored enough as a model that can go forward in instituting these sound values on which we can work forward. When it comes to the actual deliverables, starting with governments is key. And we certainly are working with governments in formulating policy for green jobs. And our specific role is in the world of work. And we're looking, how do we propagate and work towards promoting green jobs? And their governments play a key role. When I was in South Africa, we had this problem of, when I was raised, of apartheid, this huge ill in society. And when we came through it, the private sector said, hang on, we'll raise our right hand and we'll support the eradication of apartheid and transformation. We cannot work alone on the goodwill of people. It doesn't work. Because if we left it alone for the private sector's goodwill to move, you would have pockets of excellence, as we're finding in many initiatives there, but not a critical mass to deal with the real challenge. And so governments have to provide a sound regulatory framework in which we can operate. And they have to set the tone of this value system that we're looking for. Then we need to build this critical mass. In the last years, we're finding that the development has been very light on job creation, and the environmental degradation and climate change risks are sometimes compromising these gains. In the world of work, the process is as equally important as content. And so social dialogue, which the Honourable Minister has been mentioning, is being key to how we drive the processes. There needs to be more social pacts. We're finding in the countries that have got sound social pacts, which include the societies that are being challenged, are the ones that are ahead in the game of achieving success. The global unemployment remains high at 200 million. 42% of total employment is in vulnerable jobs. At the ILO, what we're looking at now is bringing about a whole green jobs initiative. And we have a just-in-transition guideline which we've developed, where we're taking it forward to governments to say, how do you deal with the challenges that you've got of moving from unfriendly employment to a more environmentally friendly employment? And we work hand in hand with them to walk through these paths. How do you close down mines, and how do you deal with the communities and the people that are negatively affected? How do you then deal with the opportunities of the low-hanging fruit that there might be of creating many jobs? Just in the IRENA estimates that global renewable energy employment increased by 5% in 2015 to reach 8.1 million. There's huge potential there. With the right mix of policies, it's predicted that we can have 60 million jobs net gain by the year 60 million job net gain worldwide. Sorry, I forget the actual timeline. I didn't note that. But there's huge potential there as well. So what we are propagating is governments need to take the lead. Private sector has to come to the party, but to bring with it the new value proposition that I referred to in the social and solidarity economy concept as an alternate model that can help us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pavan, Sukhdev, at Rio +20, you introduced the vision of a corporation 2020 that would actually be a corporation that generates not negative externalities, but positive ones. If you hear Jeffrey Sachs, we are still a very, very long way from achieving that in practice. Are you seeing some positive cases, and if so, what's the key there? And then in general, what would you say is the transformative action most needed right now?
Well, I think Jeffrey Sachs in his session reminded us that markets are not meant to solve social problems. They are meant to do a few other good things, like allocating capital and finding prices, but that's not what they're for. We need civil society, and we need governments to take on the voice of the people and convert that into policy and actions. In my campaign called Corporation 2020, which was really all about what are the levers that you can pull to make today's corporations, which are actually 2/3 of the global economy, measured in terms of GDP and jobs, what can you make them change so that they drive our economies in the right direction, so that we don't hit planetary boundaries? Jeff Sachs talked about the climate boundaries and the biodiversity and ecosystems losses. He gave examples from the barrier reef, and he gave examples of climate change, 2 degrees warming, 6 meters higher sea levels, no New York, no Mumbai, where I live, no Barbados, right? So we clearly need a lot of action, and soon, but the levers that we pull are all regulatory levers in different ways. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying, firstly, we need to get corporations out of the thinking that they are only there for the purpose of shareholders. That was an idea of Milton Friedman. He was wrong, trust me. We can go on and explain why, but that would take the rest of this conference. But he was wrong, and it is not the case that the corporation can be seen as a caricature, as a machine that is merely for the profit of shareholders. It is an institution. It is a community. It is a custodian. It is here to create value and to deliver it not just to shareholders, but to society, to stakeholders. So the first step is to ensure that corporations are required, mandated, not merely politely asked, but mandated to report not just their impacts on shareholders, but their impacts on stakeholders, which means measuring their impacts on human capital, on natural capital, on social capital, and not just on the physical capital that belongs to shareholders. This is not theory, my friends. This is practice. This is what my company does. We have had companies such as AkzoNobel, the first one to come out in public, Puma, for a limited area of natural capital, Yarra Valley Water, the main water utility of Melbourne City, a small forestry company in Brazil, a small hotel chain in Thailand, and so many others who've come out and done these measurements. So this is not about, oh, this is too complicated, it's so difficult, it's so expensive. It's not. Anyone who says it's difficult, come to me, I will give it to you for free, right? But you'll have to publish it. That's my condition, right? So this is not difficult. It's just that it's not compulsory. And unless you have things compulsory, people don't move, right? That's my experience with whether they are traders in investment banks, which I've worked for, or whether they are consultants working for environmental consultancies as I run. Unless you make it their job, they don't do it. And today it's nobody's job to do what I describe. It's just, you know, the will of consultants like myself or the desire of a certain few enlightened CEOs around the world. That's not the way change happens. We will get leaders, sure. We will not get followers. That's not good enough. So we need to move this forward. Now, one area where I think, if I may move to the world of policy, which I think we are forgetting and we must focus on, is food. Because the way we eat food, the way we make food, the way we grow food, all of these are very badly wrong. Today, our food system, if you look at it purely as agriculture and associated value chains, 27% of climate change effect. If you take the whole thing all the way from deforestation all the way out to waste down the value chain, we're talking about half the greenhouse gases are basically ascribable to the transportation, the growing, the waste, and so on, different parts of the value chain of our food system. If you look at the World Health Organization, they will tell you in their latest report that diet, human diet, is the main contributor, the #1 cause, and the biggest burden of disease. If you look at biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation, some of the biggest impacts that take place on biodiversity and ecosystem, once again, the way we eat and what we eat. 26% of the land on Earth is basically a glorified cattle ranch. It's basically either private or public commons dedicated to growing cattle to feed our beef. Another 13% is on agriculture, but a further 3% is basically growing feedstock for livestock. So altogether, 40% of the land on Earth is dedicated to what we eat. This is not necessary. The meat that is grown on 75% of the Earth's arable land meets only 27% of our protein needs, the rest being met by fish and by other proteins like pulses and all kinds of foods which contain protein, which nobody talks about, because not so profitable to discuss these things, right? So we have very fundamental issues which all kind of seem to come together in the world of food and agriculture. And I think this is critical, and certainly for the developing world, it's also critical to ensure that the small farm, which today, that is by less than 2 hectares, which provides more than 1 billion jobs. There are more than 500 million small farms around the world which provide 1 billion jobs. The solution isn't, as some would say, to convert these small farms into industry. Even my own country is somewhat guilty of this, I'm sorry to say. That we think that somehow we can convert the 280 million small farming jobs in India into industry. How? According to the World Steel Association, the total number of jobs worldwide in steel is 6 million jobs. According to OICA, which is the Automobile Association globally, the total number of car-making jobs is 9 million. How many Ferraris will you need to make in a country like China or India to be able to convert their small farmers? By the way, 98% of Chinese farms are small farmers. How many such manufacturing jobs will you be able to create? It is mathematically silly to suggest that somehow we have the ability to convert small farms into anything other than a better small farm. And by that, I mean a small farm which has higher yield, lower risk, and fairer prices. All policy interventions, in my opinion, today, higher yields, fairer prices, and lower risk. These can be achieved through policy interventions and through low-tech technologies, not even high technologies. And this is in the hands today of NGOs. They're doing a great job. Few companies are doing a great job. Where are the governments? Where is all this public expenditure going that should be targeted at the small farm to make those 1 billion farmers less poor, happier, and able to achieve self-esteem and higher incomes for their families and themselves? Why is this not happening? This, again, I'm sorry to say, is because of the greed of profits and the fact that I think it was Winnie from Oxfam who said that essentially public policy is captured by private interests.
Which, again, takes us back to Jeffrey Sachs' remarks. Mr. Heraeus, if I may ask you to just very briefly react on that point that was made by Mr. Sukhdev, that we need to see big corporations acting in a more custodial fashion. Now, it is often said here in Germany that the small and medium-scale enterprises, particularly ones like your own, that are family-owned, that have been in families for generations, take a different viewpoint on issues like this. Would you say that's true? And if so, how could we reshape the legal framework for large corporations in order to essentially promote that kind of long-term thinking?
Well, I think the privately owned companies, they can do it easier. Not because their morale is higher, but if the owners who are shown as a family or as a bigger family, if they agree to this, it's okay, it's fine. They can say, we reduce our profit, we spend part of the profit for this and that. If you are a listed company today, you cannot do this because the shareholders are asking for a certain amount of profit. The shareholders are partly pension funds and so on, where the poor retired people are waiting for the pension. So if they get told this year it's a little bit less because the company has done something good in Africa, they are not interested in this, you know. So there's a system, as you said, on a voluntary basis. They cannot do it. They are not allowed to do it. So if they get another order, if the legal system is changed and they are allowed to do something, it's fine. We have a company in India, and if I remember correct, 2% of our profit is in Udaipur. We have to give, but we can invest it together with the community in social projects, which is fine, which we do, and maybe this is in India for bigger companies too. Those things would be fine. But here in Germany, or like Winnie this morning said, you have raise the taxes, take the money away. It's not, money is not the only bottleneck. If we see how many billions have been poured into Africa and what has been done with this, so maybe we have to use the money in a better way. And my suggestion is that the big corporation, either by foundation or by the special divisions or however, they give hand to small and medium-sized companies and help them to build up something. I'm the chairman of UNICEF in Germany, and I'm so many times in Africa. And when I look the mosquito nets, for instance, I ask, where are they made? Oh, they come from China. I said, why do they come from China? Why don't they come from Rwanda or Mozambique or so? Well, by UN rules, we have to take the lowest prices, and we have to see, and the lowest prices mostly come from China or so. So the help, UNICEF is not allowed to do this because we have other obligations for the children, but we would like to see one of the many UN departments, well, they can be improved too, I think, that some of them look and build up small and medium-sized enterprises in these countries, and like UNICEF would say, we take so many thousand mosquito nets every year. The first year we pay a high price, the next year the price goes down, and after 5 years you have to be competitive, which they can be, and then need some education, need some machines. That's not much to do, but nobody cares for that.
Thank you very much. I want to briefly ask our other three panelists to just say one word about where you see partnerships as being the most crucial drivers for the kind of changes that we're talking about. You mentioned it briefly, but perhaps just a couple of sentences, and literally I'm going to have to ask for the very briefest of answers because we are over our time, but I said we talk about process, and I want to at least get.
Yeah, and I mentioned it earlier, partnerships, and I referred to the Barbados social partnership, which was formed 25 years ago to help us to devise our own structural reform program when we faced a recession. And it continued, now not just looking at financial and economic issues and industrial relations issues, but we look at a number of social issues as well, so that when our green economy scoping study was prepared with the help of the multilateral agencies, UN Environment especially, that went out for wide stakeholder consultation so that we get their buy-in. So we have the partnership being involved in the creation of the policy. We have the partnership being involved, well, the government implements, but again, even at the government level, there's interministerial partnerships, and that's important, and across sectors and across government agencies. But again, our social partnership, they give some sort of monitoring and feedback to the process as well. We partner with training agencies, the university, as well as our technical and vocational training agencies. We partner with them. Nothing will get done in this process without partnerships. And of course, partnerships with our multilateral agencies. We've come this far, as I said, with the help of the UN system. We are a page member country, and we are continuing to receive support from them. We partner through the social partnership with capital and with manufacturing. Again, we're trying to look at consumption patterns, because that's important in sustainable development, trying to ensure that we can, WTO rules and all that aside, but trying to ensure that we can produce for our market so that we are independent and that we can sustain. And then, let me not forget, partnership and dialogue with youth, with the disabled community, with women, with our civil society organizations, because if we are to be truly inclusive, we have to ensure that those groups also are part of the policy planning, they're part of developing the framework, and that they can feature then in the rollout of that policy.
Again, getting back to what Munibianyuma said about bringing them to the table. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let me ask now Vic van Vuuren and Pavan Sukhdev, in your eyes, in your experience recently, the most effective crucial partnership you've seen, so really out there, best practice partnership, what would you say is the key one, if you had to just name one?
One of the key ones which we don't tend to pay much attention to is governments with other governments in the regions in which they operate. Those regions that are government partnering with other governments together with their civil society within their national context, civil society, the workers, the employers, but governments who are working with other governments on best practice. A SADC bloc in Southern Africa, for example, East Africa's got a bloc. There needs to be far more effective partnerships in those blocks, and that will make a difference to that sub-region where they can stand up against the challenges collectively rather than trying to battle alone as individual countries.
Thank you very much. South-South partnerships, horizontal partnerships, as it were. Pavan Sukhdev.
In his interventions at a previous panel, Mr. Harsh Kumar, chairman of NABARD, he mentioned that NABARD had 4,000 NGO partners. Now, I would like to point that as actually the key opportunity for governments with NGOs and for businesses with NGOs. To me, a great example of that, a winning example of that, is an NGO called Digital Green, which actually has taken up this whole issue of producing solutions for the small farm. So they make small videos, short local language videos. They record the problems of the small farmer. They find solutions. They ask them to talk about the solutions. They highlight these success stories. And they've reached more than 1 million people, and more than almost 600,000 farmers have responded to these little videos. And they work in 9 states in India and in Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Ghana, Niger, and Tanzania. But they're not the only digital solution to providing small farms what they really need, which is better prices, higher yields, and lower risks. There are others. There's eChopal, which is the ITC platform in India. There's AgroStar, a new app in Pune in India. I'm talking about my country mainly. And there's IFCO Kisan, which is the Indian Farmers and Fertilizers Corporation. So there are quite a few of these partnerships which are coming up between NGOs and institutional, which I think is reason for hope. But once again, not yet scaling. I think these are, even 1 million farmers is too small. Just my country has 280 million small farms, so we have a long way to go.
Well, scaling is part of why we want to say it right here on the stage, in the hope that it gets out the message. Thank you very much to all of you. Can we have a warm round of applause for our panel, please? Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we now move to our parallel sessions, but before you jump up, just a very brief word on the further program before we part company. The parallel session, Policy in Practice 1, will take place here in this hall with simultaneous translation. All other parallel sessions will be in English, and they will take place in the rooms that you see here listed on the slide. So Green Investment 1 is in the Stockholm room, Sustainable Lifestyles number 1 will be in the Copenhagen room, and Inclusive Growth number 1 will be in the Birch and Yew room. And these parallel sessions will be followed by lunch. I think our lunch break has now grown a bit shorter, but nonetheless it's ample. And you will have time during the lunch break to visit that exhibition by the Green Economy Pioneers that I mentioned earlier. That is in rooms Reindeer and Elk, nice Scandinavian names, and they are over there up those stairs behind us. And I look forward to seeing you back here in this room at 2:30 for the keynote conversation on green investment. Thanks so much. See you later. Thank you.